Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, chapter 5, Halacha 4, in the Art Scroll 45b1. We're going to continue the conversation from the last one in Halacha 3, where we're talking about buying loaves of bread or even pastries and confectionaries that can possibly come from many different suppliers. Now, we're going to be getting into a palter. A palter is going to be somebody that's going to go buy it wholesale, and then they're going to go try to sell it individually. They're going to go out and sell it individually, and you can actually see this occur in real life in the old city in Jerusalem today. The Arabs will go with carts. They'll buy from bakeries, and they'll take the carts and they'll try to sell these confectionaries and breads all around the old city. So it's something that's still done today, and it was done back then. So the Mishnah says one who buys loaves of bread from a palter, and this again is going to be a middleman who's going to buy a large quantity of bread or pastries, and is going to sell them in the market one loaf at a time. And we're going to be dealing here with somebody who is probably going to be an Amaretz, but the person could be the Mishnah could be speaking about even a haver. Why? Because he's buying it in large quantities, and we know that if you're buying it in large quantities, you don't have to do the tithes. You could have a haver palter coming and buying a large quantity of it, and then selling it, and then the person who's buying it will be obligated on the tithes. The person who bought it from this middleman purchased it with a large quantity, and so he's supposed to be doing the tithes, but perhaps he did not. Now, the Mishnah could be talking about also a palter who's buying, and the palter should be taking the tithes. And we have where the palter here can't be relied upon to take the tithes like an Amaretz, but Rabbi Akiva Eger is explaining that the palter, who also is selling bread in large quantities, it would be exempt from Demai tithing. So if you have the haver buying it in a large quantity, like how Rabbi Akiva Eger is saying, and then he's even selling it in large quantities, then that could also exempt him from tithing. And if that would be the case, that's how you could get the haver who would be doing it where he wouldn't have to tithe it. Because again, he would be buying it in large quantities and selling it in large quantities, and then that's going to exempt him. But really, it's probably like we're talking about an Amaretz who purchased it from a large quantity, and he's supposed to be tithing it, and then he's going to sell it individually. And we have here a case where perhaps this bread had many different suppliers. So the buyer of this is supposed to tithe it, and the question is, how are you going to do it? So over here, the Mishnah says one who buys loaves of bread from a palter must take tithes from the loaves of each and every mold. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Let me explain Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is effectively saying that the loaves came from the same baker, and he doesn't need to go investigate who's supplying this baker, because Rabbi Meir in the last Mishnah is teaching that all of the the baker's loaves can be assumed to have come from the same tithing status. In other words, that's going to be the insight from the Marafulda that from what we see in Halacha 3 and Halacha 4, he's saying that you have to take tithes from the loaves of each and every mold, and generally speaking, that would be assuming where perhaps, the buyer may tithe together all the loaves of a single form. This would be because a baker would use his own distinctive molds, and all the loaves of the same form presumably came from the same baker. And since all of the loaves are of one form and are going to be made from the same baker, there's no worry that some of the loaves are going to be tithed and some are not, because the baker is either going to tithe all the product or he's not going to tithe any of it. That's really the opinion of Rabbi Meir. There's a dissenting view. Rabbi Yehuda says he may take tithes from one loaf for all the other loaves he bought, and even if they were made with different molds. Rabbi Yehuda has a slightly different interpretation of what a palter is. We're going to get into that later, but Rabbi Yehuda is holding that a palter is going to typically sell loaves of just one baker, so that all his loaves will presumably have the same tithing status. And that would be true even if the palter's loaves came from different forms. And that would be because a single baker could use a variety of different kinds of molds. And so the assumption here is that the palter bought his loaves from the same baker, and all the loaves can be tithed as one. That's going to be the idea. Now, there's a difference here because Rabbi Yehuda is stating in the last Mishnah, in Halacha 3, that the loaves bought directly from a baker may not be tithed together if they were baked on different days. Why? Because in our Mishnah's case as well, it's assumed that all of the palter's loaves came from the same baker. And Rabbi Yehuda, says the Pnei Moshe, would forbid them to be tithed together unless they were baked on the same day. Because again, he's holding that perhaps from day to day, they're going to change flour suppliers. And so maybe some of the flour on one day is going to be tithed, and on another day, it's not. Now, the Mishnah is going to conclude and say, however, Rabbi Yehuda agrees that where one buys loaves from a man-pole, he must tithe each and every one separately. And they're going to disagree on what that is. Rosh Sirilio is going to say that a man-pole is a type of palter, and the difference, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is that a regular palter buys only from one baker, and a man-pole is going to buy from several bakers. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's basically going to be agreeing with what Rabbi Meir is saying a palter is. Okay, Rabbi Meir is saying that a palter is a manipole, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying a palter is not the same definition of palter that we have over here with Rabbi Meir, but they are going to agree that when you're looking at what is a manpole, Rabbi Meir's definition is going to fit that. Basically, Rabbi Meir is saying that this person can be buying from many different bakeries. And so that's why you're going to have to tithe from the loaves of each and every mold, because perhaps this mold here of the Danish came from, bakery A, and this one from the Knish came from bakery B, and they have different flour suppliers. So you're going to have to tithe each of these differently. So if you're going to the old city and you're buying from a kosher palter from 2,000 years ago, from Rabbi Meir's point of view, he would say that you have to tithe the Knish and the Danish separately because they came from two different bakeries. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is going to be saying that it came from the same bakery if it's a palter. Disagreement is what's a palter. But they both agree that if it's going to be a manpole, where definitely it's coming from many different suppliers, you have to tithe it separately. That's going to be the sort of the disagreement here. But the Gemara is going to explain the two sides of the dispute about a palter, starting with the view of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that a baker uses only one mold, and that a palter uses many bakers as his supplier. Therefore, basically what this is saying is if somebody's going to buy different forms of loaves from a palter, so again, you're buying knishes and you're buying danishes and you're buying croissants, he's basically saying that each form came from a different baker and you have to tie them each separately. And according to the view of Rabbi Yehuda is holding that a baker is going to have many different kinds of molds. They're going to bake many different kinds of breads, in fact. And a Palter is only going to use one baker as a supplier, that's going to mean that the purchaser can separate tithes for one loaf for the others, even if it's made with a different mold. Why? Because it originated from one bakery, and as long as it's baked, according to Rabbi Yehuda, on the same day, it came from the same supplier. Effectively, he's saying that they're going to use the same supplier each day, and they're going to use all the molds, and the bakery is going to make knishes and danishes, and maybe even olive bread and croissants. And if you're buying from the Palter and you're buying them all these things for their children, basically he's going to say that you can do one set of tithes on one of it for all the others. Rabbi Meir says you have to tithe it individually. You can't tithe the croissant for the knish because it's assumed that it came from a different supplier.